I'm Richard Friedman, and welcome to my video cartoon for July 9th, 2025. Here we have President Trump in his vision of standing before the Supreme Court and thanking them for their decision yesterday. Here's the United States Supreme Court. Here's President Trump standing there, and this is his vision. Richard's title of this cartoon is Richard's Trump U.S. Supreme Court Vision. President Trump, in the wake of the court's apparent 8-1 decision on July 8th, 2025, addressing its wisdom for clearing the way for the Trump administration to go forward with more mass firings and reorganizations of the federal government without any congressional approval. So this gave President Trump the green light to proceed without Congress, without any approval from Congress at all, just to go on his own route and reorganize the federal government, cutting programs and basically firing people outright. Thousands of people were fired. And the thing about it is that, again, an example of it would be the dismantling of Department of Education. Steps are being taken to dismantle the Department of Education without Congress, potentially shutting down U.S. aid, etc. Now, U.S. aid is the aid we give to foreign countries, which a lot of people say makes us more safe, because people feel that the United States is doing something out in the world, and it gives us a lot of goodwill. But President Trump feels that it's got to be America first now, and we have to think of ourselves, and we can't afford to be helping other nations or less fortunate than we are, who might house terrorists or whatever. But we have a big, like President Trump, I heard him say this, we have a big ocean between us and over there. We have a big ocean. You know, one of those hypersonic missiles could be over here in 30 minutes, but that's okay, that's cool. We have our Space Force and our Golden Dome. So anyway, I'm just digressing there a little bit. But anyway, so that's the point here. And given there was what the Supreme Court did is they overruled a lower court. You see, they overruled a lower court, which stated that President Trump cannot do this without Congress, and that was an executive order President Trump made, and a lower court, a federal court. What they did is they did an injunction to mean against that and to stop any further action on the president's part. And President Trump is giving them thumbs up now for doing away with that injunction. Here he is at the Supreme Court, and he's doing away. The Supreme Court is doing away with the injunction. Now, here's the specifics of that decision here. Now, nobody would say how they voted. The only two people who came forward, straightforward, were Justice Jackson, Justice Ketanji Jackson, and she was the one vote who said that was wrong, because she basically said that, quote, the president doesn't have the right to take the Supreme Court is giving President Trump the right to take quote, this is a word she used, a wrecking ball to the federal government. And also she added, I'm just taking slips of it. There's a long thing. I read it and I tried to just take out the summary of it. And the president does not have the right to reorganize the federal government without the approval of Congress, because this was the way the federal government is organized was already set down by Congress, and President Trump does not have the right without Congress to go ahead and reorganize it in his own way. So that was Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown, a summary of her opinion. And what happened there was that Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she's from the Bronx like me, she went along with this decision. So it made it an 8-1 decision. She's a liberal justice, but the reason she went along with it, she states, is because here that there was nothing specific about what programs they were cutting or what actions they were taking. It was more like she stated that President Trump was advising all these agencies to prepare for cuts. So she stated that there's nothing illegal about advising them to prepare for cuts, and that there was no specific issue here it was too broad. In other words, it was too broad of an executive order to rule on it. It's basically what she said here, and she wanted the right to reserve, to keep this, to let it go forward, what President Trump is doing, until President Trump hits an iceberg. That's basically what she's saying here. I want President Trump to hit an iceberg like the Titanic, and then we'll take it to the court, and then we'll begin the process of overruling. So that's what Sotomayor's strategy was in basically going ahead and voting with the majority. But she said what she was doing and why she was doing it. Nobody else said a peep out of nobody else. You didn't hear nothing from, I don't want to start, if I mention one judge and then I didn't mention the other, then I got to go through the whole list. So you figure it out who the justices are. You could just look that up. But the other justices, let's say 7 justices, were like, they didn't say a word. No one wanted to know what they voted for. It was just a mathematical analysis that brought them to the conclusion that it was an 8-1 decision, because Ketanji Brown was the only one who says, hell no to this. And that's that. Okay, so that's that. And here is the cartoon here. And here is the decision of the court. There's President Trump, thumbs up. There it is. And he's standing in front. This is his vision, President Trump's vision of this happening. I'm sure he was very glad to have gotten this great victory for his administration. Okay, and here is the decision of the Supreme Court, 8-1 ruling. Court expresses no view on the legality of any planned agency layoffs or any that have taken place so far. Okay, so they're saying basically here, we're not going to take any legal analysis, or take any legal steps to remedy this situation, because basically there's nothing to remedy, because there's nothing specific, and that would be their probable reasoning. They wouldn't say, well, they wouldn't say anything else but that. Let's put it that way. Okay, no view on legality, but the Supreme Court is there. The bricks and mortar and everything that went into building this structure was put in there for them to rule on the law. That's the thing about it. You could argue that they're not being very dutiful to their mission in not ruling on the legality of this, because that's what their function is. The Supreme Court is to rule on the legality. But they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to rule on the legality. All we're going to do is we're going to hereby lift any lower court injunction on this matter as it now stands. So we're lifting we're taking away the injunction of the federal judge who made that injunction. We're taking that away. That's all we're doing. And we're also saying that in the future, if any specific cases come arise, we'll take a look at it. And if we see fit, then we'll take action. So they're kicking the can down the road, as they usually do, is what they're doing here, to a case that's specific. And that would be their rationale if you really spoke to any one of them. They'd come up with that rationale. But the argument remains that they're not judging on the legality of this, and that's I'm going to leave it at that. Okay. Now here's President Trump here, and this is what I wrote based upon President Trump's remarks in the past and what he has said. Okay, and here it goes. I respect the court's wise decision to overrule the judicial tyranny of Democrat Clinton-nominated U.S. District Judge Susan Ilston, because Ilston was the judge who originally did the injunction and blocked it in the lower court. out in California. He's going to say a bunch of liberals out in California, liberal justices out in California. And she had been appointed by a Democrat, the Democrat Bill Clinton. So he's going to put both the Democrats and the liberals out in California into the boat. And he's going to say they've been, thank God that we stopped those people. You know, I mean, I put myself in President Trump's shoes when I do these things a lot of times and say, boy, we licked those liberals and those Democrats out in California, those wackos. So that's it. So that's basically here. And I respect the court's wise decision to overrule the judicial. I think Stephen Miller used the term judicial tyranny. He's one of President Trump's people in the White House there, very influential. Judicial tyranny of Democrat Clinton nominated U.S. District Judge Susan Illstrom. Now here's the punchline. I call her Judge Ill because she has Trump derangement syndrome. Okay, that's Judge Ill. So her name for President Trump, and I'm standing in President Trump's shoes now, being President Trump, Judge Ill. She's got bad case of Trump derangement syndrome, one of the worst cases I've ever seen. Okay, there it is, folks. There is Trump's diagnosis of Judge Susan Illstrom with terminal Trump derangement syndrome. And there it was. There was my cartoon. There was the decision of the Supreme Court. You could read. It's a big thing, but you could just. This is the summary of what they did, and they said this matter so far, and we hereby lift any lower court's injunction on this matter as it now stands. So what they're saying is, you could come back another day. You got some specific to show us. We'll take a look at it, and if we think that's something, we'll rule on that then. We're not going to rule on the legality of this at this point. It's too general to rule. But the idea is. The issue was they're supposed to rule on the legality, not the legality of specific law, but on the legality of President Trump reorganizing the government without the approval of Congress. They didn't go near that. So that was what were supposed to have done, in my opinion. I'm giving my opinion. I don't usually do that, but I'm going to say it. Their mission was to determine what the reorganization and all the firings, thousands and thousands of firings of people, and all the other things that have been happening, if that was legal without Congress. But they kept away from that, like it was poison ivy, you know, the Supreme Court. And they just said, well, come back another day when you got something specific, but we're going to overrule that lower court. We're going to overrule that and give you clear passage. So there you have it, folks. Thank you for watching my video. God bless you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.